they'll trickle in. So first of all, hopefully all of you have gotten your papers. If you haven't, you should get them shortly. The grades weren't bad, to be honest. You did better than my con law students, which is always curious who prepares more, but you took this more seriously than they did. I put up here the distribution and curve, which you may never actually seen before, but whenever we grade for the final exam, we are required to grade you on a very specific curve. That is, the average has to be between 285 and 315, and we only give so many A's, so many C's. We have fairly strict guidelines, so I always try to grade it along the curve. My goal for the midterm is to grade it tougher than the final, because I want to scare you. And I'm very transparent about that. I want to light a fire under your belly to say, okay, man, I only got a B-, I want to get A. If I go easy on you on the midterm, you'll say, oh man, I can just coast. Last semester, my observation was that whatever people got on the midterm, they got on the final. There was very little movement from the midterm to the final, either up or down. So to the extent that you don't like the score you got on the midterm, that is a sign that you need to work significantly harder to break above wherever you are. In terms of where people fell, the overwhelming majority of the class got B's. There was one failure. This person didn't show up. So it actually wasn't a substantive failure. It was a person who didn't bother taking the exam. So that person got an F. There were a couple D's and there were a couple C's. What I'd like, not what I'd like, what I request is that if you got a C- or lower, please make an appointment to see me right away. What I'd like to do is, I know other people want to meet with me. The people who got a C- or lower will get priority reservations. You know, like if you're in United, you get to board in Zone 1. You get to see me quicker, but if anyone else wants to see me, that's fine. Just send me an email, but you'll have to take a number after the students who did the weakest, because they are the ones I want to help the most. There were a bunch of A's or a couple papers that were very good. So what I'd like to do in the next hour or so, and I won't keep you much later than that, is to walk you through the question, which should still be fresh in your mind. And if you want, I have them printed out over here. Feel free to run up and grab them. I also have the A+ answer. Feel free to grab those as well. What I'd like to do, yeah, come on up, is walk you through the question. And I want to walk you through the question the way that I would read it. Now, you may not agree with me, but I'd recommend you do it this way. So first of all, you actually, in another respect, did better than my con law papers, because you all figure out how to do a word count. One student in the other class did a character count, 1,000 characters. That's basically 4 text messages. So you at least figure that out. And if you didn't know how to use the word count feature, and this is a rule of thumb for life, you have a finger, you can count. I'm not saying this facetiously, but you may come to a point in your life where you have some sort of technical difficulties and you freak out. Just count, right? You have to be resourceful. You can't sit and you can't blame IT. You can't. This is your own responsibility. So what I recommend when I first get the exam is I always put the instructions at the top. And I know it sounds stupid, read the instructions, but read the instructions. The reason why is the instructions give you an outline of how to actually answer the question. So it says here, you're a law clerk for the Chief Justice of the Caribbean. Okay, so you know that you're writing some sort of memo in some sort of fictional jurisdiction. I'll usually make something up, or maybe the Texas Supreme Court, whatever it happens to be. So you write a memo, again, 1,000 words about a swashbuckling property dispute among 3 pirates. I give you their names, Captain Jack, Elizabeth, and Blackbeard. That's useful for you because now you know who the people you are talking about. So you should absolutely put in your notes, initials J, E, and B, just so you have them very easily to remember. What I write here is actually interesting. There are no statutes or regulations, so you're applying common law and natural law principles. So given that this was taught at the very outset of our semester, when you've done all the Fox cases and all the hunting cases, this should have been your indication that, okay, he's asking us about the hunting stuff. And the entire point of the hunting stuff was that there were no statutes and there were no precedents. They were ruling from first principles. The final will not necessarily look like that. We've done a lot of stuff, and there are a few occasions where the common law has one approach, the modern law has another approach. So pay very close attention. If I say the jurisdiction applies all common law rules, as understood in the first restatement of property, that tells you you're in a common law jurisdiction. If I say they apply modern rules from the third restatement of property, you're in a modern jurisdiction. There are not many distinctions that we've talked about, but we have flagged a couple. And as we move towards the end of the semester, excuse me, it's a little bit of a slight cough. There'll be a few more of those, okay? So after you read the instructions, I would jump down to the bottom, to the actual questions itself. This is a fairly short fact pattern. I made it, not that it was easy, but I made it deliberately short because I didn't want you to waste a lot of time reading. It was only about a page and a half. I can give you 3 or 4 pages, so make sure you budget. But I deliberately wrote this one to be short because I didn't want you wasting all the time reading. So it says here, the suits are consolidated into a single case before the Supreme Court, and you have to write a memo addressing 5 issues. Okay, so the first one says, what is the strongest argument in favor of Captain Jack having the superior claim to the Kraken? Okay, so I can ask you these questions a few different ways. I could ask you, how should the court resolve X? If I ask you, how should the court resolve X, that means you have to address both sides of the situation, right? You say, here are the strengths of this position, here are the strengths of that position. But if I'm asking you, what are the strongest arguments for a person, I want you to actually make out the case. So as an advocate, what is the strongest argument in favor of Jack? Same for number 2, right? And what is the strongest argument for Elizabeth having the strongest claim to the superior claim to the Kraken? Much of property law is not necessarily who has the perfect claim, it's whose claim is stronger, whose claim is better. So by asking these questions 1, 2, I'm trying to test you to understand, can you compare and contrast varying claims? Now there's third question, should Captain Jack prevail on his claim that he acquired Staten Island? So here we're talking about acquiring an island, a piece of land, and we did cases like that, Johnson versus McIntosh. So you have the discovery doctrine, you have the conquest doctrine. So excuse me, these things just start, bouncing around in your head. Okay. Number 4. Okay, so you have 3 people. You have Elizabeth, you have Jack, and you have Blackbeard, and they're asserting a claim to a treasure chest. Now you're thinking, wait a minute, treasure chest. This is something you find buried in the ground, right? Okay, so we have all these cases on finding stuff, right? This gets you in the right frame of mind. And this question is a little bit more tricky. It's not asking about one person. It's saying for each of these 3 people, who has the strongest claim? Now, in terms of your word count allocation, you think, well, maybe this question's a little bit longer than the other ones because I have 3 people instead of 1. I try to make the final question, the 5th. There's always going to be 5 questions. That's my practice. About policy and explicitly policy. This one says, discuss the roles of fairness and efficiency for number 1 and 2. We spent a lot of time discussing fairness and efficiency, right? The rule of capture is very certain, but it's not very fair. The labor theory rewards labor, but it's not very certain. So you have these competing values. Okay. So let's go up, and I want to read for you just paragraph by paragraph the question and what should be jumping at your mind. One tip that I use is you now have 5 questions, right? You've already read these 5 questions. As you read through the fact pattern, in the margin, put a number, right? It's like, oh, this paragraph relates to question number 1. Put number 1 in the margin. Oh, this paragraph relates to question 3. Put number 3 in the margin. Excuse me. The reason why you do this is because it guides you when you're writing your answer. This way, when you read it once and you put in the margin which question is which, you can just jump to it, right? So say if you have question 3 here, here, and here, those are the paragraphs for your answer. It saves you the need from having to read the question a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th time, right? You can always mark up your answer if you want, but by putting the number of the question in the margin, you are basically outlining within the exam itself. Almost healed. I'll be healed by Tuesday. So the question begins. Captain Jack, a pirate, was on a mission to hunt and kill the legendary sea beast, the Kraken. Did everyone know the Kraken? It's this massive sea beast from from mythology. He set out from the port. He chased a monster for a week. Okay, so this should make you thinking of the Genvi Rich case, where they were hunting and they investing a lot of time. He cornered the Kraken near the shore of Staten Island, which is where I'm from. It's not deserted, so it ought to be. He cornered the beast, right? This is just like Pearson v. Post, where, the hunter, cornered him at the last minute. He fired his bomb lance at the Kraken, and it hit into his heart, right? Now, we've discussed in some of the cases that touching the animal was necessary to capture it, and throwing the bomb lance may be enough. It may not be enough, okay? So he celebrated. He thought he got it. And as a custom in that neighborhood was, he went to the island, and he waited for it to wash ashore. So this is like a combination of Pearson v. Post and Genvi Rich. What you see that I do is I take elements of different cases and I blend them together. So it's not exactly right. But then, of course, something magical happens. The Kraken swims in the fountain of youth. And the water heals them and brings it back to life. So you think, oh, man, did he actually capture it? Did he take the animal's life? There's no one right answer. And this is something which I hope you all appreciate. There is no single answer to any of these questions, ever. I always make them open-ended so that any answer you give me that's well-reasoned will get credit. I don't have an answer in mind. Okay, so the next day, the Kraken, Elizabeth Boats appears. She spots the Kraken. She fires her bomb lance, and then she kills the Kraken for good. Like, she kills it. It's done. Okay? So just to thinking about it, right? Captain Jack certainly struck it, but he didn't kill him. Why? Because the animal can keep swimming. So the person who actually killed it was Elizabeth, if you read the question carefully. All right, so the next day, the Kraken washes ashore, and Jack finds it, and he says, wow, look at this. The lance is sticking out with the letter E. This is the symbol on the bomb lance that people used to indicate who the hunting was. Captain Jack's bomb lance was supposed to be a J. He ignores this truth. He ignores this custom, and he says he's the owner. Then Jack wanders around the island and realizes no one's there. So he thinks, wow, I discovered this island. So thinking he's the first person to ever set foot, he says, I am the discoverer, and I claim this land in my name. Okay? We discuss ideas of acquisition by discovery, acquisition by conquest. You start thinking about these things. But indeed, he wasn't alone. After he announced his discovery, Elizabeth swam ashore. Elizabeth saw the Kraken lying on the beach, and she knows that her E lance was sticking out. And she goes, it's mine. I killed it with my lance. And then Jack replies, no, I hunted it for weeks and killed it with my lance. Well, that's not exactly true. He didn't actually kill it, but he did hunt it for weeks. And then Jack adds a second argument, which is important. It washed on my island, so it's mine. This is the rationing solely argument, right? When there's a wild animal on a person's private property, it belongs to that person. This is like the duck hunting case, right? Remember, the ducks were on the guy's property, the Keeble versus Hickoringill. So the pirates can't work it out, so they say, no, we'll sue each other. Okay. Then Elizabeth wanders around, and the captain tells her, this is my island, and I demand you leave immediately. And she promptly ignores him. You can call that maybe a conflict of sorts, and there was no victor. Elizabeth had heard a legend that there was a stolen treasure ship. A stolen treasure chest that was buried on the island by Blackbeard. The fact that someone buried a treasure means that Jack was not the first person there. So Elizabeth randomly starts digging in the sand, and she finds a treasure chest with Blackbeard's gold. And she says, I found it, it's mine. Okay? So this brings in a lot of the cases we've done about finding stuff. Was this abandoned? Was this mislaid? There's the English rule, the American rule, there are different rules to be applying here. This is what you should start thinking about. Jack sees a treasure chest. He demands Elizabeth give it to him. He says, this is my island. Everything on this island is mine. And indeed, there are some cases that says that property is buried in the earth. Remember the ring that was buried in the dirt? It belongs to the property owner. So, there's a legitimate property dispute here. Elizabeth again ignores him and carries the chest to her boat. And Captain Jack says he'll sue her for the treasure. Then they all leave, and they head to the court, and they all sue each other, as promised. Okay. Does anyone have any questions on the actual fact pattern itself? Again, this is probably shorter than what I give you on the final, but it's at the same level of a difficulty. There's a lot of stuff buried in there, and nothing's hidden, but I give you lots of facts, and you have to derive from the facts a fairly elaborate legal situation. So any questions on the pattern? Yeah.
So he found the Kraken and then he claims the land. Is there significance there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, right? Can you claim because the animal washed ashore before he claimed it, right? I mean, that's a legitimate argument you can make, that because he hadn't yet claimed it, it wasn't his when it washed ashore. Or you could say because it was on the land when he claimed it, then it became his, right? I mean, I could accept, again, virtually everything on this paper can go either way. I don't have an answer in mind. Okay. Any other questions on the fact pattern? All right, so let's move on to the actual A+ answer, which I have. I printed out here and I gave it to you on paper as well. So a couple of things before I go over the A+. Even the A+ paper is not perfect. It's very good, and it's a good example to demonstrate for all of you, but it isn't perfect. And I'm sure, in fact, I'm positive there's stuff in here that I don't like. And there's probably stuff in here that I think is probably wrong. But that is not why it's up here. It's up here to see what one of your colleagues did under the same circumstances and the same time. One other thing I'd like to point out, the A+ answer here is only about 715 words, right? So you can get a really good score without even maxing out your words. This is perhaps proof to you that I don't just grade by however long you write. I'm actually reading these things fairly closely. So what makes an A answer for this exam, right? You have to cite the cases. You have to cite the theory, right? And then you have to apply it. I can't count how many of you, said, "Oh yeah, in the Fox case," right? Just say Pearson. I appreciate that it's the Fox case, but just say Pearson, right? The whale case, say again, right? Just mention it. But it's not enough just to mention the cases. You have to extract the relevant part of the case. So for example, in questions 1 and 2, what I really was looking for, I think this one did a little bit, was to discuss the various theories behind them, right? So it's not enough to say rule of capture or custom. I mean, we discussed lock labor theory. We discussed, the rule of capture in terms of Pufendorf and Barbarack. I'm sorry, Pufendorf and Grotius, right? The papers that got the most points on these first 2 questions discussed these natural law theorists. They discussed the cases. They discussed the theories. They demonstrated to me that you didn't just open up a black letter outline and look up the rule of capture, right? We spend time on this in class. I want you to show me that you internalize what we covered in class. So it says, I realize it's a little bit small to see, but you'll have the paper as well. It says, the strongest argument for Jack is a rule of capture appears to be opposed, which provides that mere pursuit of a wild animal isn't sufficient to vest title on the hunter, and the hunter is to occupy to acquire the animal. And that's almost a verbatim quote of the holding in Pearson, right? So I know the person there gets the case. But they don't just stop by telling me the rule. They go in the next sentence. The rule of capture advances the goal of society to capture wild animals, foster competition, and award catching fairly naturally. That's that Latin phrase for wild animals, right? So it's not just giving me the black letter rule, but also telling me why that rule is in place. The difference between a B and an A is the why. Why is this a rule? Why did this rule develop? The paper continues. This rule is also easy to administer because it is easy to determine who captures the wild animal. This is the certainty, right? The rule of capture is easy because a person actually has it in his possession. So courts don't have these complicated evidentiary disputes. Okay. Therefore, since J was the one that found, it's a typo, but yeah, they're not perfect, that found the body of the dead Kraken on the beach and occupied it, according to the rule of capture, J would acquire the title. Okay. Then moves on to a second argument. He says, J could also argue under Locke's labor theory because J set out from port and chased a monster for a week and hurt him. right? So Locke's labor theory says when you mix your labor, you inject your labor, you get a claim to it. The time and energy he invested in hunting the Kraken, which should be awarded. However, E could also make the same argument. Therefore, this is not J's strongest argument. I mean, that's a solid answer, right? That embodied actual legal reasoning. That you say, here's the strongest position. It's not quite as strong, but here's the lead argument, right? You use your words to explain, which is the strongest argument. And, oh, this one's not quite as strong. But that tells me that you're actually thinking about both sides. It's a strong argument. and I know when you're writing these, always try to lead off with a strong piece, because I'm reading the first one. It's a really good, number one, you put me in a good frame of mind. So always try to, kill number one. Okay. So any other questions in number one, things that you may have written that are different than this, or that you have questions? Yeah.
It seems like there are more arguments.
Good. Look, I'm sorry. These are not complete answers. There are always more arguments. What argument additional do you think is worth making?
Just like this doesn't even address the issue of like the claim on the actual land.
Good.
Is washing up on it.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. A lot of you wrote about the rationally solely doctrine, right? I mean, that's also a good argument.
I guess what I'm wondering then is like, what is the trade-off between addressing essentially every argument that the question brings up and just fully fleshing out, I guess, one or two arguments? Like what's
so this is why, and I mean, people often don't understand the word limit. This is why the word limit is important. It puts everyone in the same playing field, right? Because if you're able to sit there and write about 6 different arguments and you have unlimited words, that gives you an inherent advantage. Here, you have to husband your words. You have to choose how you want to frame your argument. You have to choose which argument is indeed the strongest, which is what the question asks, right? So if there are 3 arguments, 2 really strong and 1 not so much, then maybe you're not going to mention the one that's not so strong. Like I said, this one did it in only 700 words, right? And I mean, this paper could have kept going and probably gotten even more points. But yeah, I mean, that's the reason why there's a word limit. It forces you to actually answer the question and not just dump in everything you've ever learned, hopefully to get more points. There's no way to fairly grade exams when people are writing different amounts. Inherently, some people can write more than others. One note, though, on the blue books, people who wrote by hand, I strongly encourage you not to do this. I strongly encourage you, for one important reason: you can't edit. You can't move stuff around. So if you're actually trying to use your words smartly, if you're writing by hand, you're handicapping yourself. Now, people may say, oh, I don't type well. Well, for the bar exam, you should learn. I mean, taking the bar exam by hand is handicapping yourself. Also, your penmanship is not nearly as good as you think it is. One of my, was it this class or my con law? I can't remember. But one of the papers, I think it was a con law, the penmanship was so awful, there were actually words that I could not make out. Most of them I can figure out from context with the person trying to say, but there's some words I couldn't make out. How is that fair to you that I can't read your paper and give you a grade for sentences? I don't know what you're saying. So I think there were 3 or 4 people who hand wrote. Type. If you don't have a computer, borrow one. If you can't borrow one, you can buy one on eBay for pretty cheap. But type. There's no reason why you should be handicapping yourself. You work so hard during the semester. And if you handicap yourself to be down like a third from a B to a B minus, you've just shot yourself in the foot. There's no reason. This is not for me. I mean, I can't read what you're writing, but I'll do my best to figure it out. But sometimes I can't. For that student, I actually highlighted all the words I couldn't read because I don't know what they are. All right, let's go number 2. For Elizabeth, the strongest argument is custom. Good, you're answering my question. Law students love writing maybe and perhaps this and perhaps that. I like a certain answer saying this is the strongest position. Boom, right? Law students also saying maybe this, maybe that. I know what you're doing. You're hedging. You don't actually know the answer. That's obvious, but give me something that's solid. So in the whale case, again, I would prefer if the person should again be rich, but I know what the whale case is. The court followed the custom and award the whale to the party who killed the whale. We should follow the custom because it has always been accepted by society to serve its purposes, right? This is the reason why the custom emerged. The decision also incorporated Locke's labor theory, where a hunter's efforts probably should be rewarded rather than awarded, but rewarded to create the incentives for hunters to maximize the efficiency of hunting. So indeed, this is efficiency, right? This is the value we discussed later on in number 5. Elizabeth could argue that she was the one who killed the Kraken. According to the custom, she should be awarded the title. However, there's a downside, right? There's a weakness. It's difficult to determine where the hunting begins and to compare the amount of efforts contributed, right? This is the issue of certainty. The evidentiary issues are tough. So look, this is a solid answer. The student chose custom, and they gave me the strengths and also, gave me some of the weaknesses. So, I mean, it's a solid all-around answer. This is not the only answer. I mean, you can answer this based on the labor theory. You can discuss Pearson v. Posted dissent, which a couple of you did. There's lots of different ways of tackling this. Did anyone else have something for number 2 they want to ask about? There are a number of ways you can tackle this question, but this one handled it pretty strong. Anything in your minds? Anything on number 2? No? All right, let's go to number 3. Okay, number 3 again was about the deserted island. So, person hedged a little bit here, but again, there's never a perfect. I've never actually given 100. It's never happened. I've had a couple 96s or 97s, but I've never actually given 100. So, it hasn't happened yet. J is likely to prevail in his claim to acquire Staten Island. SI. Okay, so the court in McIntosh held that the first in time is first in right, and you can acquire land by discovery. Following this rule, since the J was the first one on the island and claimed the title through discovery, the court should award the title to him. I don't think that's right. I think the Blackbeard was there first, right? But again, no paper is perfect. By awarding the title to J, J will have the right to exclude other people exploiting natural resources. Okay, so here we have a rationale of why we have these doctrines, right? And this is harkening back to Johnson and how the natives weren't, responsible stewards of the resources. Therefore, this finding promotes another goal of property rights to prevent the tragedy of the commons by excluding other people's rights. I mean, this was the issue with the Indians and the hunting, that they would, not have enough property rights. Again, this answer is not perfect. I mean, a couple of you wrote about the fact that pirates are like savages and that they're not able to own land. A couple of you wrote that, there's actually a conquest because Jack told Elizabeth to get off and she ignored him, so there was actually a little fight, there was a battle. There are a lot of different ways you can take this question, but what I'm really looking for is a discussion of McIntosh, because that was a leading precedent. A significant number of you actually cited the cases like Hannah v. Peel and Armory about finding stuff, but the rules for finding physical objects are different than the rules for acquiring land. There's a different set of rules. Some of you, even when we're doing the hunting cases in 1 and 2, cited Hannah v. Peel and Armory, and that's not right. Those cases involve taking stuff from nature, whereas Hannah and Armory about stuff that people lost or misplaced. So make sure you're citing the right cases, but here at a minimum, you should be talking about Johnson. Any questions about number 3? Yes, sir.
Was there anything about like how Blackbeard owned it first or got there first because he buried treasure there a long time ago?
Yeah. And a number of you wrote something to the effect of that Blackbeard got there and buried his treasure was him actually mixing his labor with the land, and actually that was his act of acquisition. A number of you wrote that, which was correct. Yeah, there's no one right answer. Any other questions at number 3? Yes. Are you scratching your nose or you're okay? All right. Nothing else on 3? All right, let's go to number 4. This one required you to actually understand the Hannah v. Peel case. And not just Hannah v. Peel, but if you recall, it cited several precedents that didn't quite line up. That was the brooch case. Remember, the brooch was on top of the windowsill. The strongest answers engaged some or all of those precedents, because what we have here is a fairly complicated situation, right? Because Blackbeard buried it, right? And then Jack comes along and says, "Oh, this is my island." And then Elizabeth actually unearths it and digs out of the ground. So they all have claims of various natures. And by the way, it wasn't Blackbeard's treasure. He stole it, right? So he wasn't the true owner. So actually, a couple of you noted, which was correct, that the British Crown has a superior claim if they return, right? They have the ultimate superior claim. So let's see what the student wrote. She wrote, or he wrote, I don't know who it is. B's strongest argument is finder's keeper, the rule in armory, which provides that the finder of lost property has superior title to the rest of the world, but the true owner. Since B was the first one to lay hands on the treasure other than the true owner, he should have superior title against whoever came later on. Yeah, this is exactly right. And indeed, in armory, this was a chimney sweep case, right? The little boy probably stole the jewel. We talked about this in class. So he was actually similarly situated to the pirate, if you can imagine. Okay, second paragraph says, Jack's strongest argument is that prior possessor rule doesn't apply here because this case should be decides when the exception to the finder's keeper rule. Okay, so in Charmin and Eels, these were two of the cases cited in Hannah. The court held that the possession of land entitles possession to everything attached to land, except for the original owner. So in this case, the student wrote, because Jack owned Staten Island and the treasure chest was in the ground, the landowner should have a better title. This was, you remember, the ring was buried in the pool of mud, and the boat was buried underneath, right? Okay. So number 3, okay, Elizabeth doesn't really have a strong argument either in the prior possession rule or in the exceptions mentioned above because she's not the first finder. I guess, all right, I guess that's best. If Elizabeth claims that B lost the treasure chest and abandoned it, which makes E the finder of the treasure chest first in time, E might have a chance to prevail. So I think the strongest claim for Elizabeth has to be if indeed Jack didn't own the island. Because if Jack didn't own the island, then Elizabeth could have a finder's claim, right? But in any event, Blackbeard would have the superior claim. Also, a number of you wrote about the distinction between mislaid and abandoned property. The buried treasure chest was really neither mislaid nor abandoned. It was put there quite deliberately. In fact, it was hidden out of view. A couple of you actually cited, there's a discussion in the book about treasure troves and the rules governing those, because actually the government usually gets a claim to it. That was actually very good for a few of you who wrote that. But this was a question that really could go any which way, and really depending how you resolve number 3 would in some respects dictate how number 4 comes out, and I can go either way. Any questions on number 4, things that you wrote that may be different or things that you want to ask me about? Yeah.
Just wondering how involved we should get with like mixing interests. So, for example, if you decide that Jack doesn't have superior to the island, in 3, in your discussion of 4, you're talking about something like Elizabeth's claim. She doesn't really have a claim to the treasure, but she can definitely screw Jack out of it by backing Blackbeard.
Well, I mean, look. So read the question, right? Let me go back to the. I asked you to answer. What's the strongest argument, right? You're not bound in number 4 by what you're in number 3, because here you have a different client, right? You're actually trying to make the strongest claim for Elizabeth, and you could say because Jack didn't actually acquire Staten Island, then he doesn't have it under the finder's doctrine. Right, you can do that. You're not. I don't demand consistency on a 3-hour exam. You can answer the question in this manner. Questions at number 4. Yeah.
I'm actually confused on number 3 because I think you were talking about that also that the treasurer, the finder's keeper in number 3. No.
I'm sorry, what's your question?
I'm confused about. I'm sorry, I'm going back to.
That's okay.
To number 3, but what was the case in number 3 that we were supposed to use?
Johnson versus McIntosh, the Indian case.
Oh, okay. Okay, all right. Sorry.
Okay, you good?
Yeah.
All right, let's see if we're going to wrap this up and get you out of here soon. Okay, so let's go to number 5. Number 5 was, again, this is a question where you can burnish your strengths and try to teach me that you learned stuff this semester. So number 5, the student wrote, the custom represents fairness and the rule of capture represents efficiency. Right, in a nutshell, this is what we're talking about. The customs are instituted for fairness because people understand what they are. But capture, even though it's not particularly fair, is very certain, right? We know how to apply it. The rule of capture is easy to administer because it is easy to determine who captured the wild animal. Meanwhile, it discourages the hunters who fear their prey will be legally taken away by someone else at the last moment. I would have loved a citation to Pearson here because that's effectively what they're arguing, but this is a majority a decision in Pearson. The custom awards a hunter's efforts to create incentives for hunters to risk their lives, right? This was Gen v. Rich, that people aren't going to risk their lives hunting these huge whales and these huge sea monsters if they know that some jerk can come along and take it. But there's a difficulty. It's tough to determine where and when the hunting begins and to compare the amount of efforts. The person had more room. He or she could have written more. But this accurately sketches out the various pros and cons of efficiency. I would have liked to have had actually discussions of the cases, Pearson and Genn. I would have liked to have seen discussions of Locke and Pufendorf and Barbarack. But again, no paper is perfect. But these are different ways where you can show me how you shine. These are the inherently policy questions. And if you're not certain of how to allocate your words, save some of the bank for number 5, because this is where you can really flex your muscles and show, and impress me. Okay. So any questions number 5, things that you wrote, things that maybe you're uncertain about? The 5th question is always going to be your policy questions, like, in the 3-point shootout, it's like the money ball, right? This is your last one to really show me that you know what you're doing. And in truth, 1 through 4 should be priming you because there's actually some repetitiveness. One note, don't do. If you have a similar answer in 1 and 5, don't say number 1, C5. Just write it twice. Don't do that. It's silly because then I'm like, okay, I'll take points off 1 and I'll just put points on. I'm not giving you extra points. So just if you have to write something twice, that's fine. So don't do shorthand. Occasionally there will be repetitive stuff because you have only so much to write about hunting whales. There's only so much you can write. Questions? Yes.
I have a question about maybe some of the other A+ answers you posted on the website. Some of them kind of abbreviate. For example, I think I saw a pretty simple FS. Are you going to know that, or do you clear what you want us to do as far as?
Look. So if you write FS, I probably know what you mean. If you write FSCS, oh god, was it fee simple subject condition subsequent? I'll probably figure it out. You're only saving like 3 or 4 words per exam. I don't really care. Occasionally, I'll get an acronym that I can't figure out, and then I don't give credit for that. So, if it's something that's fairly obvious, or some people do is they'll say FS and they'll put parentheses fee simple, and then they'll just use the abbreviation thereafter. If you're not certain, spell it out once, then you can use it again. Just that way I'll know. I've had a couple of abbreviations over the years where I didn't know what the person was talking about, but for the most part, I can figure it out. You're not saving too many words. Oh, and also don't do this. Some people, to save words, delete the spaces between words. Don't do this. I actually take points off for that. It's really annoying. I once had a student who made an entire paragraph 1 word. This was a couple of years ago. It was so stupid. So a couple of you did where you made like the last sentence 1 word just to try and squeeze in the word limit. I know. I
Like Dell told us to do it.
Yeah.
don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. Don't do that. Any other questions? All right. Have a good Friday. I'll see you all later.